Pastor here with Bridgepoint, and we are so glad that you are here with us today. We are starting a new series that I'm excited about, and I hope eventually you'll be excited about it too. To be honest, the next 3 weeks we are going to be talking about money, which I know is everyone's favorite subject, especially in church, right? Unfortunately, a lot of times people don't enjoy talking about money in church, and maybe for good reason, because it hasn't been done well in the past. Maybe you felt like it hasn't been done respectfully, but we hope to show you that we can talk about it well here. If we are honest, we don't really like talking about money anywhere, do we? We don't like talking about it with our spouse. Like, that's usually not the thing that you talk about on date night, right? You sit down, you look across the table. It's so good to spend time with you. Can we talk about our budget? That's a great way to kill a date night, right? Like, you don't enjoy talking about it with your coworkers. You don't sit down over coffee and start sharing how much everybody makes, right? Or how well your investments are doing. You don't really love talking about it with your company if someone comes over. They're like, oh, this is such a delightful meal. You mind if I ask how much you paid for all this? It's awkward, right? We don't love talking about money, honestly, with anyone other than ourselves, right? Because those conversations usually go how we want. We're like, how can I get more? Or what can I do with it? And then you get to imagine what it would be like to have total control over all the money that you want, right? But the reality is we don't enjoy talking about money all that much anywhere. Money can create stress and anxiety and fear and jealousy and discontent, right? And so oftentimes this feels like one of the most personal and private subjects that we could possibly consider. But yet we're going to talk about it here, right? And so maybe the question you have for us is, why are we talking about money in the church? And I want to be very clear that the reason we're talking about money is not because Bridgepoint is not doing well financially. I want to make a commitment to you as your pastor that will never be the reason that I teach about money. There may be times where I let you know about specific needs within the church or within our community that we want to respond to generously, but I will not teach in this way about money because Bridgepoint's in a bad spot. I just don't think that that's the right way to approach it. In fact, if you look back, you'd see that teaching about money and generosity is a consistent rhythm within this church. We try to make sure that once a year we are talking in some way about how faith and money relate. I don't know if you know this or not, but the Bible talks an awful lot about money. In fact, if you flip through, and it would take you a while, you would see that there are over 800 references throughout the Bible to money and possessions. Those 800 references comprise 2,300 verses in the Bible. If you look just at the teaching of Jesus, the recorded words that we have that came out of his mouth, 15% of what he taught about related to money and possessions. That's quite a bit, isn't it? It's more than heaven and hell combined. It's even more than faith and prayer combined. And so Jesus clearly knew that money was an important subject for us. And I think part of the reason it's such an important subject is because it's so attached to our hearts. Money is emotional, isn't it? Like, even something as simple as finding $5 in the jacket you pulled out of storage for the fall, like that makes you excited, right? Or you stress over spending $3 too much on a box of cereal, or missing an opportunity to save a little money on something you were purchasing, right? But then we could talk about larger things too, like the emotions you feel when you get a raise, when you feel like someone has cheated you out of your hard-earned money, right? Money is attached to our hearts, and so it produces emotion in us. And Jesus understood this. That's why in Matthew chapter 6, verse 21, he said this, "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." I want you to imagine that our treasures, our money, and our hearts hold hands. That anywhere they go, anywhere one goes, the other goes as well. Our heart and our money is emotionally attached. And so the reason we talk about money is because it affects our relationship with God. The way we view our money, the way we spend our money, it affects our relationship with God. And so here at Bridgepoint, my privilege, as God has entrusted it to me, is to talk about your relationship with God and do everything I can to help you grow in that, right? And so part of that is talking to you about how money and faith relate. It's a part of our honoring God, it's part of our relationship with him, and ultimately it is a part of our commitment to him. And so there was this church in the first century, shortly after Jesus died and rose again. There was this church in the city of Corinth, okay? And originally, this church had all kinds of problems. They were divided, they didn't like each other, they had all kinds of immorality within their church. And so the person that planted that church, a man named Paul, wrote them a letter to correct all their behavior. So, man, you guys have a lot to work on. And that book, or that letter, is in our Bible known as 1 Corinthians. So after that letter was received, they started to work on stuff, and they started to get things right. They started to honor God in their lives in almost every way. But there was still one area of their life that they lacked. And so when the same church planter, pastor named Paul, wrote them a second letter, he addressed what they were still lacking in their faith. And we read about it in 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 7. He wrote this. He said, "Since you excel in everything, in faith, in speech, in knowledge, in complete earnestness, and in the love we have kindled in you." Let me pause for a moment. Wouldn't you love that description to be made of us? That we excel in knowledge and in speech and in faith and the way we love one another. He said, since you excel in all that, he said, see that you also excel in this grace of giving. So I want you to honor God also with the way you view and use your money. And that's true for us too. That the way that we use our money, the way that we view money is a part of our faith. It's one of the ways that we honor God, and Jesus cares about that, and we care about that as well. And so we want to spend a short time talking about how faith and money relate. Now, you may be thinking about how next week is the perfect week for you to schedule that much-needed time away, right, the vacation, or maybe you're sitting there thinking, I can't believe that this is the Sunday that I brought a guest with me. They finally said yes. Or maybe you have plans to bring someone with you next week, and you're texting them right now, telling them you're going to be sick next week, or there's something going on. Or maybe you're the person who's sitting here for the very first time, and you're thinking, what in the world have I gotten myself into? I'm back in church for the first time in a long time, and here they are talking about money again. And what I want you to know is that I actually think that this is a great time to be new in Bridgepoint, and here's why. Money, admittedly, is one of the most difficult things for us to talk about in church, right? And so this is a time for you to test us out. If we can talk about money well, in a way that is helpful and honoring to you, then you can trust us to talk about anything, right? And so I'm going to challenge you, if you're brand new, to test us out, see how we handle this most difficult subject, and if we prove to be able to do this in a way that honors God and helps you, then maybe you can trust us with even more than that, right? And so we're going to begin this series called Shift, because ultimately, in order for us to honor God with our money, we need to shift the way that we view what we have. If we want to honor God with what we have, we've got to shift the way that we look at it. Stephen Covey, a great author and leadership guru, wrote this. He said, the way we see things is the source of the way we think and the way we act. Let me read that again. The way we see things is the source of the way we think and the way we act. So your mindset and your behavior flows out of your perspective. And that's true in so many ways, and it's definitely true with money. The most important part about money is not how much of it you have or even what you do with it. The most important part of money is how you view it, how you see it. Because how you see it will shape how you feel about it, it will shape what you do with it, and it will shape what it does to you. So the most important part about money is how you view it. And so this series, we're going to look at 3 major shifts we need to make in how we see or view money. Okay? So the first one starts like this. Most of us think that what we have belongs to us. We live in this ruggedly independent culture where we celebrate what we can accomplish and accumulate on our own, right? We work hard to pick ourselves up by the bootstraps, to make something of ourselves. And whenever that happens, if it happens, we look at it and we feel proud because of what we have accomplished or what we have earned, right? And so it's so common for us to see what we have as belonging to us. And when we consider that, it produces these emotions in us, right? Like if you think that what you have is truly yours, it belongs to you, then you feel proud about it. Feel attached to it. Like I start to love it because that's what I do with things that are mine, right? And so if I love what I have, and specifically if I love the money I have because I think it belongs to me, then I'm going to feel really sad when I lose some of it, right? I'm going to feel really excited when I get more of it. I'm going to feel really scared when it doesn't seem like I have enough. And so when we think that it is ours and it's all up to us to earn and to accumulate and to save, then it creates some instability or even insecurity in our lives. But the Bible presents a different paradigm for viewing money and possessions. The Bible suggests that everything actually belongs to God. that everything is his to begin with and everything is his possession. Let me show you a couple passages. First, we're going to go back to the Old Testament in Psalm 24, verses 1 and 2. This says, "The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it." Before I keep reading, this claims that everything on the earth is God's. Every possession, everything, every person belongs to him. And you could insert in this as you're reading why. And the answer would be, for he founded it on the seas and established it on the waters. So everything belongs to God. And the reason is because it was from his mouth that it came into being. It was from his will, his creative genius. God is the originator of everything we know and every person that lives. And so everything belongs to him. Colossians chapter 1, verses 15 through 17 say it in a little different way. It says, "The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation." It's talking about Jesus right now. "For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authority. All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together." So what this suggests is that Jesus is the creator. Everything came from him, and everything is for him. And therefore, everything belongs to God. Now, when we hear that, for some of us, it feels a little uncomfortable. We want to put our foot down and go, no, it doesn't. Because I worked for it. I earned it. I got the degree that I'm still paying for, and I'm using that degree, and I'm working really hard, and I'm talented, and I'm smart, and I'm charismatic, and I can do all this. And so whatever I get is for me. I'm the one that seized the opportunity, submitted the resume. I'm the one who has earned, right? It's common for us to have that mentality toward what we possess. There's another passage I'd like to read to you. This is from Deuteronomy chapter 8. And it's important to understand where the context surrounding this passage, all right? So in the Old Testament, the oldest part of the Bible, tells the story of the people of Israel. God chose them to reveal himself to the whole world so the whole world might know who he is. He rescued them from slavery out of Egypt. He provided for them. And then he delivers them into this promised land so they can have secure borders and a stable, wonderful place to live. And so they're getting ready to take possession of this land. And as they're taking possession of this land to live as the people of God, God gives them this law. He reminds them of how he wants them to live. And that's what the book of Deuteronomy is. And so in this book, he reminds them of something very important. Starting in verse 10 of chapter 8, it says, "When you have eaten and are satisfied, praise the Lord your God for the good land he has given you. Be careful that you do not forget the Lord your God, failing to observe his commands, his laws, and his decrees that I am giving you this day. Otherwise, when you eat and are satisfied, and when you build fine houses and settle down, and when your herds and flocks grow large, and your silver and gold increase, and all that you have is multiplied, then your heart will become proud, and you will forget the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery." Verse 17 says, "You may say to yourself, my power and the strength of my hands have produced this wealth for me. But remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you the ability to produce wealth and so confirms his covenant which he swore to your ancestors as it is today." Did you hear that? He goes, don't forget, don't stop worshiping God, don't stop devoting yourself to him, because when you do, you will become confused and you will think that everything you possess is because of your hard work, your own giftedness, your own talent or ability. And when you do that, you'll start to drift away from him. And you'll find yourself distanced from him. And so as they're moving in, one of the most important things these people need to remember is that everything belongs to God. And whatever they have came from him. And in this world where we are so inclined to think that what we have belongs to us, it's because of our effort and our giftedness and our talent and our ability. We need this reminder too. God says, don't forget. Don't be so proud to think that it came from you. Everything belongs to me, and whatever you have is because I've chosen to distribute it as such. And so what we need to understand first is that if everything belongs to God, everything we have belongs to God. If everything in the world, if God is sovereign, he sits on the throne to rule over all of creation, if everything belongs to him, then everything we own, everything we have belongs to him as well. And this is what introduces a seismic shift in how we view what we have. Because until we make this shift, we think like owners, right? It's ours, which means that we can do whatever we want with it. And because it's ours, we feel entitled to it, which usually means that we're not thankful for it because people aren't thankful for things they've earned, right? You don't high-five the clerk at the supermarket whenever you hand her money and she gives you back your groceries because you've earned it, you've paid for it, right? And so we don't get all that excited about things we earn. And so if we think it's ours, if we think like owners, oftentimes we lack gratitude for everything we have in our lives. But there's this shift that takes place when we see that it's not ours, it's His, it's God's. And the shift is that we stop being owners and we start being stewards. A steward is someone who has been entrusted not with their own wealth, but with the wealth and the possessions of someone else. A master or a landlord would give his possessions or her possessions to someone else to care for them and to manage them, not for their own good, but for the will of the owner, right? And so when we think like stewards, it shifts our perspective so that we see that it belongs to God and it's actually for Him to be used for His purpose. And then if we also understand that it belongs to Him, then we'll start to be thankful for it because we realize that whatever we have is a gift from God to us. He's actually entrusted us to use what He has, what belongs to Him, for His purpose. And then we get the joy of experiencing that, right? And so this is a major shift in how we view what we have, because all of us have what I would call a core objective with our money. There's one thing more than everything else that you want your money to accomplish for you. For some of you, it's just that you want to provide for your family, right? That's what you see money as. So you work hard, you earn so that you can pay your bills, you can make sure that your family has food and shelter and clothing and transportation, and maybe, if possible, you can save a little for education for your kids as well, right? And so maybe for some of you, your core objective, the thing you want your money to accomplish, is to provide for your family. Maybe for others of you, you just want to enjoy life. Money is a means to make the most of life and have the most fun and do things and travel and see things and go to concerts and whatever it is. Like you just live it up. And that's what money means to you. For others of you, money is a source of comfort and stability. It will protect you in the future. You don't spend much now, and you really don't care about taking a whole bunch with you when you retire, but you just need to make sure that you have enough to make it through life. For others of you, you just love to earn. God has gifted you with a mind and ability and to make a bunch of money. And so for you, money is a means to getting more. For others of you, it's an investment that will secure your retirement so that when you're tired of working, you'll be able to take it easy and travel to see grandkids and take awesome trips and have everything you need. And for others of you, you see money as a means to generational wealth so you can pass it on. Like all of these are core objectives, and my guess is that one of them drives you and shapes what you do with your money. Now, to be very clear, I believe that there is actually something that honors God about every single one of these. Like there's something about each one that touches the heart of God. But as long as we hold on to that core objective and say, this is what my money is for, this is what it's going to accomplish for me, then we are still acting like owners because we are doing what we want with the money that God has entrusted to us. And so whenever we think like stewards and we shift to see that it belongs to Him, not us, then we start to ask, well, how can I use what He's given me to do what He wants? And that shifts the core objective of the money we have from whatever we might have claimed before to honoring Him. That becomes the core objective. Everything I have is to honor God. And so that means that everything you do with your money can become a way to honor God. The way you save, the way you spend, the way you deal with debt, the way you provide for your family, the way you save for the future, the way you give to people in need, the way you're generous toward your church or other organizations. It becomes a way to honor God because it's His to begin with. And so this might lead you to ask the question, does God really care how I spend every single dollar? Right? I mean, really? Does God really micromanage? Does He really care about how I spend every single dollar? Let me answer that question with a question. Let's pretend for a moment that you have an awesome car, all right? The car of your dreams, whatever it might be. Maybe for you it's a minivan. Maybe for you it's a convertible. I don't know. Maybe you already have an awesome car. I'm still rocking the minivan. And if a minivan is your dream car, then let's trade in like 5 years when my kids are a little older, all right? But for right now, that's what I have. But okay, imagine that you have a sweet ride. okay? Whatever that would be. And then I want you to imagine that you have a child that is a teenager, has just gotten his or her license, and that child comes to you and says, hey, Mom, or hey, Dad, can I borrow the car? And in this spirit of generosity, you say, sure, why not? And you toss over the keys. And that child takes the car and backs out of the driveway, maybe squeals the tires a little bit, and drives away. How much of the time that your child is driving your car do you care how they use it? All of it, right? And the reason is not only because you care about the car, but even more because you care about the child. And you understand that every moment that they're in it is a moment that they can either enjoy what you've given them or put themselves in danger because of what you've given them, right? And God feels the same way. I believe that God cares about how you use your money, every bit of it, because he knows what you can do with it, and he knows what it can do to you. And he cares about what belongs to him, but especially he cares about his children who belong to him. And so God cares about how you use what he has entrusted to you. And he desires for us to choose to honor him with every single bit of it. Now, that may honestly not change a lot about how you use or spend or save, but it will totally transform the way you think about it, the way you approach it, the way you make decisions. And so I want to be mindful that everything I have has come from God, not me. But if I'm honest, my heart is fickle. Isn't yours? For those of you who've been in church for a while, been following Jesus for a while, my guess is this is not the first time you've encountered the idea that everything belongs to God, but how easy is it for our hearts to drift away from that truth and to start to think that it's all ours again? It's so easy, isn't it? It's as if we need this continual reminder that it's his, not ours. Well, God in his grace, he loves us, he knows us inside and out, he knows exactly what we need. And so God, as he was beginning to define a relationship with people who wanted to follow him and honor him, God's made a provision so that we would have a continual way to remember that everything we have belongs to him. Do you want to hear it? It's in Leviticus chapter 27. It says, a tithe of everything from the land, whether grain from the soil or fruit from the trees, belongs to the Lord. It's holy to the Lord. Every tithe of the herd and flock, every 10th animal that passes under the shepherd's rod will be holy to the Lord. No one may pick out the good from the bad or make any substitution. And if anyone does make a substitution, the animal and its substitute become holy and cannot be redeemed. So in the Old Testament, this is many, many years ago, probably a couple thousand years before Jesus came on the scene, God instructed his people to offer what was called a tithe. A tithe was literally a 10th part, 10%. But it wasn't just any 10th part or any 10%. It was intended to be the first 10%. And so the way that a shepherd would do this, he would hold out his staff and the sheep, the flock, would pass under it. And he would count 1, 2, 3, 4. And the first of every 10 animals would be pushed off to be made a gift to the Lord. The first one, that's yours, God. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. That one's yours. 12, 13, 14. All the way up. That the first 10th, the first 1 out of 10 would belong to God. The same with farmers. They would collect their produce, their harvest, and they would gather it in bushels. And the first of every 10 would be pushed toward God. It's yours. They'd take it to the temple or the tabernacle, depending on the point in Israel's history, and they'd say, this is yours. This belongs to you. And as they started to earn income, as they had money, as they received paychecks, the first 10th would go to God. And for our purpose right now, I don't want to focus so much on the percentage, but rather the priority. Because God was setting up a rhythm so that every time someone earned, every time someone counted what they had, they would give him the first of it. Because giving to God first reminds us of all that God first gave us. That's the principle behind the tithe. That's the purpose of generosity, is that giving to God first reminds us of all God first gave to us. We need this rhythm. We need this consistent way of knowing that everything we have is God's. And when you give to God first, when it's the first thing you do with your money, it changes the way you view not only what is given away, but also what is left. You say, God, this is yours because it belongs to you. And then you say, everything that is left is yours also because from the beginning, I've changed the way I view everything that you've entrusted to me. And so giving to God first reminds us of all that God first gave us. It's an incredibly important principle for us. God has already known our hearts. He knows how fickle we are. He knows how prone we will be to think that it belongs to us. And so he goes, when you earn, when you gather, when you collect, the first thing you do is give some to me so that you remember that it's really mine, not yours, and that everything you have has been entrusted to you. Jesus affirmed this. Jesus did not talk a lot about tithing. In fact, there's really only one reference we have out of his mouth, but I want to read it to you. The context is a little strange, and so I need to explain it. Jesus is teaching, and he sees this group of religious people, and this group of religious people, they're not honoring God with the way they're treating people. They're rude, they're mean, they're judgmental, they're prideful, and they're neglecting the poor. And so Jesus comes, and he speaks to them these words in Matthew chapter 23. Verse 23, he says, "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give a tenth of your spices, your mint, your dill, your cumin." And just so you know, the way that a tithe worked, people were expected to give a tenth of everything. And so a lot of times people shortcutted it and they only gave God a tenth of the big things. So Jesus is applauding their generosity because they've given a tenth of everything, even down to the finest spices in their cabinet. And he says, you've done all this, you've tithed everything, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. Now listen, he says, you should have practiced the latter, meaning generosity and kindness, without neglecting the former, which is tithing. And so here Jesus affirms this practice of giving God a first percentage, a priority percentage of their income. And the reason is because Jesus wants them to understand that everything belongs to him, but he also wants them to treat people as if they also belong to God, right? And so Jesus doesn't teach a whole lot about tithing, and some have taken this to mean that Jesus doesn't really expect his followers to tithe, that there is some other way to approach finances and generosity. But if we look at the way that Jesus took the Old Testament law and reinterpreted it for his followers, we see that every time he raises the bar rather than lowers it. I'll give you a couple examples. The Old Testament law said that you're not supposed to murder, okay? Jesus said, you've heard that it said that you shouldn't murder, but let me tell you that you shouldn't even be angry with your brother or sister in your heart, because that's just as if you're murdering them in your heart. So which is harder, to not murder or to not be angry? Jesus raises the bar, right? The Old Testament, he says, you've heard it said, do not commit adultery, but I tell you, don't even commit lust in your heart or in your mind toward another person, because in doing so, you're really committing adultery in your heart. Jesus raises the bar. Every opportunity Jesus had, he raised the bar, because the Old Testament law was about producing guilt in people, and Jesus was all about giving grace to people, and he expects grace to be a better motivator than guilt. And so he always raises the bar. And so the best we can guess about how Jesus viewed generosity is he wanted tithing to be the starting point for followers of Jesus, not the finish line. There's a book called The Treasure Principle, written by Randy Alcorn. And in it he wrote this: every New Testament example of giving goes far beyond the tithe. However, none falls short of it. We see the first Christians giving radically, sacrificially, unbelievably generously toward God and toward others. So the New Testament, the newer part of the Bible, begins with 4 biographies of Jesus: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They're the accounts of Jesus' life, his travels, his teaching. But immediately after that, there's a book called the Book of Acts. And the Book of Acts chronicles the account of the message of Jesus, his death and resurrection going out, spreading, And it talks about the beginning, like the first Christians and how they followed Jesus. And it talks about the start and the spread of the church. And if you read just the first 4 or 5 chapters of the book of Acts, you will see a group of people so passionately devoted to Jesus that they are recklessly generous. We are told that they would sell their possessions, even their homes, so that they would have money to give to the church and to the poor. They viewed everything they had as being available to other brothers and sisters in Christ so that no one would have to live in need. And if they heard about a need, they would immediately do whatever they could to meet that need. And all of this was most likely above and beyond their commitment to giving the first 10th of their income to God and his church. And we hear this. And when you are hearing this kind of generosity, what does it stir in you? I mean, if we're honest, we hear that and we go, man, there's no way, right? We go, that's crazy. It sounds reckless. It even sounds irresponsible for them to just be giving that much away, right? And we hear that, and we compare it to what we know of Christianity today. And the generosity practiced by the first Christians is so different than the generosity practiced by Christians in America today. Statistics show, depending on where you get your statistics, that between 5 and 10% of all Christians tithe, give at least 10% of their income. 5 to 10%. Again, depending on where you get your statistics. A significant percentage, sometimes it varies, but it's always a significant percentage of American Christians give absolutely nothing, 0% of what they have to God. The average generosity for a Christian in America today is 2.5% of what they have. 2.5%. Did you know that back in the Great Depression, people gave an average of almost 3.5% of their income? So we actually give less now than people did during the greatest financial crisis our country has ever known. And you set this alongside the example that we have of the New Testament church. The New Testament church was giving radically, sacrificially. And you set the condition of the contemporary church, the American church today, next to it, and we find a great and piercing discrepancy between the two. Now, I don't know how much of that is true for you. I don't know how much you give, and so you may fall into that 5 to 10%. You may be moving toward that, and that's fantastic. But overall, there is a significant generosity problem within the church, and we have to ask, why is there such a discrepancy? Why were the first Christians so generous, and why are Christians today not? And maybe it's because they didn't have the benefit of financial planners to warn them of the irresponsibility of generosity, right? Maybe it's because they didn't have the inundation of nonstop marketing campaigns by companies that convinced them of things they didn't even know they needed, right? Maybe we've just evolved and become wiser and grown past generosity, but I think there's actually a much deeper reason. For Christians in the first century, when they chose to follow Jesus, it usually cost them almost everything. And when they declared their commitment to him, when they were baptized, when they chose to walk behind Jesus and to spread his message, they often lost their jobs. Their reputation in the community was destroyed. Their families walked away from them. Sometimes they were drug out of their homes. Many of them had to watch loved ones, friends, fellow Christians, mistreated, beaten, even killed because of what they believed about Jesus. And so for the first Christians, they knew that following Jesus was a sacrifice that might cost them everything. And so when it came time to be financially generous, they go, that's nothing compared to what my faith has already cost me. And for us, I fear that part of the reason that we scoff at the suggestion that we should give a percentage of our income to God, even a big one, is because our faith has cost us so little up to this point. I look at my life. My faith has cost me nothing in my immediate or extended family. If anything, it's made it better, right? I look at my time, my reputation in the community, my career, my future. Like, my faith has cost me so little. And I know that there are probably people in this room that is not true for, that your faith has cost you something. But for most of us, our faith in Jesus costs us very little on a day-to-day basis, right? And so when we think about making a sacrifice in the area of our finances for Jesus, it seems out of line with the rest of our experience of faith. We go, that doesn't make sense to me. Why would my faith in Jesus cost me that much? And we're not even saying this, it's subconscious, but we think, why would it cost me that much in that area when it's cost me so little in every other area? In church, I need you to understand that for that very reason, we need a way to feel our faith. We need a way to make a sacrifice for the God who gave so much for us. I don't know about you, but when I think about what my faith cost Jesus, I don't want a faith that cost me nothing. And so generosity is a sacrifice for the God who sacrificed so much for us. Like, I want to be able to look at my life and see some tangible evidence that I take Jesus seriously, that I'm willing to surrender and sacrifice, and even to the point when it hurts a little bit because of how much I believe in him. And I'm not saying that generosity is the only way you can sacrifice. That's for sure. And I'm not even saying that you should give only because you just want to feel your faith. We should give, we should be generous to God because it's all his. And that's what he told us to do. But the reason we have such a problem with that is because we don't have a faith that costs us much in any other area of our life. And so don't give in to that. Don't just jump in the stream and let it carry you away. Resist that and choose to have a faith that costs you something. At the end of every year, we get our annual giving statement, right? And there are times where we have, in our home, have celebrated what we've given. There are other times where it created this tinge of, man, can you imagine what that money could have cost? Or what could have done? What it could have accomplished? And I've never really thought about how much I personally need a tangible sacrifice in my faith until preparing for this series. But it has created this anticipation, this excitement to get that annual giving report. Because Rachel and I set a goal every year. We want to give this much. And I can't wait to get that back at the end of the year and to look and go, you know what that money could have bought? You know what we could have had with that? That's our sacrifice to Jesus this year. Our faith cost us something because it cost him something. And it thrills me to think about that. I need that to move my heart closer to God. Our faith is built upon the truth that our faith and our hope and the grace that we have in God cost Jesus everything, right? In 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 9, we read, "For you know that the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that you through his poverty might become rich. He left his place in heaven. He walked the painful road to the cross. He died an excruciating death. He endured days in the grave, and then he was brought back to life so that I can have hope, so that God might not count my sin against me, so that I might be able to come and gather and worship him and know him and pray to him and find peace even when life hurts. And I have hope that will endure through whatever life brings, all because Jesus sacrificed for me. And when I think about what my faith cost him, I want my faith to cost me something too. Don't you? And generosity gives us that opportunity. There's a story I'd like you to read. I don't have time to walk through it today. It's found in 2 Samuel chapter 24. And for those of you in small group, you will read this. You'll talk about it during your group this week. It's about a man named David. And David was delivered from this tragedy. God intervened. God saved David and saved David's people because he was king. And at the end of this experience, I just want to read you one verse. This is 2 Samuel chapter 24, starting in verse 24. After David reflects on all that God has done for him, God's goodness and his grace and his salvation, we read this. The king replied to Araunah, a man who was trying to give David something to offer to God as a sacrifice for free. David replies, "No. I insist on paying for it. I will not sacrifice to the Lord my God burnt offerings that cost me nothing. I refuse to give God a gift that costs me nothing. And I want us, church, to say, I refuse to live a life for Jesus that costs me nothing. Could we believe that he's worth it and trust him for it? And it says, so David bought the threshing floor and the oxen and paid 50 shekels of silver for them. David built an altar to the Lord, and there sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings, and the Lord answered his prayer on behalf of the land, and the plague was stopped for Israel. May we say, I refuse to live a life for Jesus that costs me nothing. During this series, we're going to look at how we view money, and today the big shift is moving from seeing it as all belonging to us to starting to see that it all belongs to God. And that's actually great news, because he's in control. And we can thank him for what we have, and we can trust him for what we need, because if he's provided already, he'll do it again. And generosity is this prompt, this reminder that God has given us, so that every time we earn, we choose to believe and express that it all belongs to him. And in so doing, God has also given us a way to sacrifice for him, to show him our commitment. And so throughout this series, I want to be honest, I'm going to challenge you by the end of this series to make a plan for priority giving, for you to set up a rhythm, and to choose an amount, and to give that regularly to God. That's the hope, because I believe that will change you. I need you to understand, though, that my aim with this series is not to get something from you, but it's to get something for you. I want you to experience God's best in every part of your life, and that includes your finances. I want your faith to flourish, and I believe that generosity is one of the greatest catalysts to spiritual growth in our lives. I heard somebody say today that generosity is often a thermometer, a gauge on how we are growing toward Jesus. And because I love you, I want to do whatever I can to push you toward him, and I believe that generosity can do that. And so I want to give you just a few simple ways to start, okay? The first is this. Okay, I have 2 questions I'd like for you to write down and continue to ask yourself, okay? So throughout this week, as we begin this series, ask yourself these 2 questions. The first is, do my finances reveal that I am thinking like an owner or a steward? Do your finances reveal that you are thinking like an owner or a steward? Based on how you spend, based on how you save, you invest, whatever it is, are you acting and thinking like an owner, it's yours, or a steward, it's God's? And number 2, what does your generosity reveal about your faith? What does your current generosity reveal about how committed you are to Jesus, how much you trust him and believe in him? Here's a question. If your generosity was the only thing someone knew about you, what would they think about your faith? If that was all, they didn't see your life, they didn't see your habits, your practices, if your generosity was the only thing someone saw about you, what conclusion would they draw about your faith in Jesus? The second challenge I have for you is I'd like you to consider what your next step is. You'll see on the screen what we call a generosity journey. We really believe that generosity is a journey filled with several steps. And so, as a journey, I believe that the further into it you go, the closer you get to God. Remember, your heart and your money, they hold hands, they walk together. And so as you move your money in increasing ways toward God, you're moving your heart toward him, which means he has more of you and you experience more of him. And so this journey is not about giving more of your money to God, it's about giving more of yourself to God. And I believe that as you take these steps, you will experience more of God in your life. And so I don't know where you are on this journey, but I'm encouraging you to consider what your next step might be. So if you've never given a gift to God through this church, your next step is very simply to give a gift. Just choose an amount. You can give it today in person. You can do it electronically through our app or our website. But the challenge for you is just give a gift, make a contribution, get in the game, begin your journey, and then pay attention to how God responds to that. If you've already done that, or maybe you're ready to just go to another level, the next one is that you become an intentional giver. This is where you decide a consistent percentage of your income and you commit to it. The third level, or the third step of the journey, is that you choose to become what I call a sacrificial giver. This is where you go, I'm going to pay attention to what God asked, and even though it's going to hurt, I'm going to give 10%. I'm going to give my first 10%. I'm going to make that sacrifice, and I'm going to test God and see how he responds to that. And the last step along the journey, this is where we all want you to get to, because this is where you say, everything I have is God's. You are a surrendered giver. That means that you may even choose to give above and beyond a tithe. You begin to practice the generosity of the New Testament church, where you say, if there's a need, I'm going to meet it. I'm going to respond when the Holy Spirit prompts me, which means that you're always having a conversation with God. You're always living in his presence, always led by his Spirit. And so for this series, I'm asking you to consider what your next step of generosity might be as you move your heart toward God. And finally, I'm going to give you a simple prayer to pray. Here's the prayer. God, show me what percentage of my income is generous and give me the faith to give it. Will you pray that prayer with me this week? God, show me what percentage of my income is generous and give me the faith to give it to you. That's the beginning of this journey. And so why don't we take a moment and I'll just pray that prayer with you right now. Almighty God, everything belongs to you. Not just what we possess, but our lives, our hope, our sin now belongs to you. Everything is yours because you are Lord above all. And I'm sorry for the times I've forgotten that. I thank you for the gift of generosity that reminds me that everything is yours. And so as your people, the church, we want to walk in step with your Spirit. We want to be led by you. We want to know you more. And so God, we pray this simple prayer. Please hear it and answer it. God, show us what percentage is generous and give us the faith to give it for your glory in Jesus' name.
We invite you to stand with us now. And as we learn this new song together, I invite you to allow the words of this song